Connor, since you're the host, you'll need to end the practice session.
Yeah, got it. I will
Great.
start at, are we starting directly at 1?
No, you can end it now because then other people could
Okay.
start coming in. Cool, thanks, Connor.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Guillermo. Good timing.
Yeah, do you need anything from me now?
Just hang out just in case.
Okay.
Okay,
And do you have the polls ready?
we're not going to do polls.
Okay.
Great, thanks, thanks, Guillermo.
Welcome, everyone. Look, the capital markets are down. There's a lot of compression on flower pricing. We're talking about inflation, interest rate hikes. People are upset because, well, I'm pretty harsh on Congress these days, and that's what we'll be talking about. Our interesting cannabis sector, people are down instead of thriving. We're trying to build a vibrant adult use marketplace here in New York, in the Northeast, and in other states. And isn't this the right time for Congress to actually act, create actions, create game changer actions? There is a dearth of capital. So health and wellness products for many, what about job creation, wealth opportunities, and ending the stigma of the plant once and for all? I am Jean Sullivan of the Arcview Group. Jeff Finkel had to travel today. We are talking about true game changer moves for our industry today. And we have a top pro with us, Michael Correa, who spent more than 25 years on the Hill and 10 years as head of government affairs for NCIA. You'll hear from him in a moment, because I want to mention that many of you have been part of the Arcview Group for many years, part of our community. Founded in 2010, 13 years ago, hard to believe, by the amazing Troy Dayton and Steve D'Angelo, pioneers in our industry. And their mission was to create a kind of first of its kind and much needed gathering, a haven for investors and entrepreneurs with social equity as a real backdrop and core. See, they were appalled, and we're still appalled at the stigma around the plant of cannabis and related social justice issues. It's pretty shocking. I know that's what got me into the business, by learning that. And then I saw this as a great opportunity for job creation and wealth creation and a lot of fun, because we're bound by a common mission. We will create more in-person events, as we have a real history of that for so many years, bringing you the industry's very credible and experienced thought leaders. And in fact, meet us in San Francisco, August 3 and 4 at Moscone, as we're partnering with the LIFT conference to do an investor summit and a lot of interesting sessions. And that link as well as the website is up. So you'll have, we'd love to see you there. Now we're going to continue our digital webinars like today. We all want to keep learning, and there is so much to learn. In fact, I made up this phrase many years ago. It's important to learn every day and to get your PhD in cannabis. I know that's what I'm going for. There's so much, it's so complicated, but so fun to learn that. Now, as most of you know, just back to ArcView for a second, we operate a venture fund, and we are looking for some dynamic companies and also some, interesting investments for us. We've made 21 investments in our ArcView Collective Fund. So if you have an early growth stage company, ideally with revenue, be sure to find me. In fact, Carolyn, you can put my email in the chat if you wish, and I welcome that. Send me your exec summary if you wish, and if you think we should take a look. Now, as part of our ecosystem, we always also have a consulting arm, because people have asked us for years, can you help me? And so we have a dynamic consulting arm that can help with anything from strategic planning to brand expansion, state expansion, get a license. And so the ArcView Consulting link is in your chat. And then we have a marketing arm, and our wonderful leader offers a full range of services: branding, collateral, website development, lead gen, strategy, and any CMO needs. So Carolyn, feel free to put that link in there. And we have a library of really strong, impactful programs. And you can see over 36,000 people have seen our programs, especially since being very digital since COVID. And you can take a look and see replays. There's some really, really great terrific programs that we've done over the last 3 years. Let me take a very quick moment to thank our strategic partners. Green Tank, who's a provisioner of innovative vape hardware, PayQuick, and now they are merged with Green Check Verified, offering full treasury services, all banking needs for thousands of banks, brands, and license owners. If you need a bank, don't hesitate to reach out to me and I will connect you. We also want to thank data partner Hoodie Analytics. They do real-time data for your brand. It's really a great platform. So I want to thank you as an audience for being with us today. I want to get to now one of my favorite subjects. I follow or try to follow closely every move that's going on in our Congress, in our Senate. I am so pleased to welcome my friend and subject matter expert, Michael Correa. Please come to the stage. Welcome.
Hey, Jean.
Welcome, Michael. Your background and knowledge is so impressive. Give us a few insights on your background, first on the Hill for more than 25 years, and then working so hard for NCIA for the last 10 years. Talk to us about, some of the sites you've seen and your background.
Well, quick little background. I was a political science major originally from California, and I came to Capitol Hill in 1997, way back in the time machine. I think if I were to be a member of Congress, I'd be the 25th most senior member. And so I've been here a while. And I remember coming back in the 90s and having the old timers talk about back in the day. Well, now I'm an old timer and I can talk about back in the day, back in the 90s. And so I was on the Hill, committee staff, personal staff, worked in a district office. I've done everything, House, Senate, political campaigns. I just loved it. I wanted to get involved with policy to make a difference. And when I saw this job open up 10 years ago, 2013, I thought, wow, this has got to be the coolest job in America. Being able to take my skill set and apply it to something that was really important to people and would really make a difference, and really made me feel good knowing that I was applying my skill set for good versus just profit making. And, having one less person arrested makes my life, makes the world a better place. Having a family get access to medicine, having a person start a small business, it's just been really a fun time, and it gets me excited to be able to do politics and then do good at the same time.
So great. And I know that you are a rolling off of NCIA. So what's next for you?
So for everyone, I am Director of Government Relations for NCIA. So I've been the lobbyist for the cannabis industry for 10 years. NCIA is the oldest, largest, and most diverse trade association out there. It began, you mentioned ArcView beginning. I think NCIA began at the same time. I think we're in year 13. And so I've been a part of NCIA for the trade association. We really focus on the small businesses, but we have all businesses, small, medium, and large over the years. I'm going to be transitioning out onto my own and being a lobbyist on my own, opening my own company, doing lobbying in the cannabis space. I'm really excited about the opportunities that it will afford me to be able to go out on my own and not just speak for one group or one association, but to speak for everything and to be useful to anyone out there in cannabis and start talking to people and start doing, whether it's advocacy or lobbying, small companies or whatever. There's a million opportunities and a million directions I can go, sitting on boards, just advancing the cause. I'm really excited. I've been doing this for 10 years. I'm perfectly positioned to do it and get on to the next steps of my career.
That's great, Michael. So let's bounce through today some of the significant, what I call drivers of business in our cannabis sector. We want to discuss today some of the issues so everybody understands the latest, the leading edge, the razor's edge of what's going on. But we also want to talk about solutions and alternatives, because I've already shared the fact that I'm mad, I'm upset, I wish it were different. And I have made a fool out of myself from the stage, saying when I thought various initiatives would happen, especially federal legalization. I don't even bring that up anymore, but we are going to talk about that. Let's start with the great big pink elephant in the room, which is safe banking. We were so disappointed it didn't happen at the end of 2022 in the last congressional session and Senate session. First of all, we have to have safe banking. So talk to us. What would be different if we had it? What's the state of the situation right now on safe?
So I want everyone to go back in a time machine to 2013. Soon after Colorado and Washington State legalized for adult use, a congressman from Colorado, Ed Perlmutter, a congressman from a congressman from Washington State, Denny Heck, introduced, it was called the Marijuana Businesses Access to Banking Act. And still there were no legal sales in those two states. Neither of them were big cannabis reformers. They just sat on the Financial Services Committee in the House, and they thought, our states have legalized this industry. They need professional financial services like every other industry in America. Let's do this bill. And you have to remember, it was introduced 10 years ago. There were only 2 states that were legal. It was viewed as an incremental piece of legislation to just help those states and help the industry and help banking come forward. Now, fast forward 10 years, you have 20, 30 states legal. You have 48 states that now have cannabis laws that conflict with the federal government. And now you have people saying safe banking doesn't go far enough, how we've gone full circle. And I want everyone to know that the Safe Banking Act was created just for incremental reform. It was a safety bill. It was a banking bill in a Republican Congress to help the industry. It was not to solve all the issues around cannabis. And that was going to be coming later on. I never thought I would be working on this bill 10 years later, but here we are still working on it. I'm not going to give up hope. We were very close. The bill passed Congress in 2019 with overwhelming majority. And I'll be honest with you, if there wasn't a pandemic, if there wasn't the COVID pandemic in 2020, we would have had a lot of energy going into 2020 where I think SAFE could have passed. But because there was a pandemic going on, the priority on cannabis was pushed back. It got delayed and it kept getting delayed. And then when the Democrats took over Congress in 2020, there was a whole nother animal in the room. And that was safe banking doesn't go far enough. Let's improve safe banking. They called it plus language. They added language on. And I want people to know that look at it as a spectrum. There's safe by itself and there's safe plus. All along that spectrum, you're going to have different support levels depending on what's in the language. And that's the biggest issue we're facing right now. There is tremendous support. It's passed the House of Representatives 7 or 8 times. It has 40 co-sponsors in the Senate. It is teed up and ready to go. But the difference is going to be it takes 60 senators to agree on something to get it passed. And that means you need 60 senators agreeing on language. And that is the big question mark now, what Senator Schumer is going to put into this bill and what language is going to be there, because you will gain some people and you will lose some people depending on the language. And that is the big issue. It's very frustrating, but that people say that's how the sausage is made. And that's what's going on with SAFE right now. I am optimistic. They finally had a hearing on it 2 or 3 weeks ago. It wasn't the best hearing. They want to move the bill. The Senate is saying positive things. So, Gene, I'm going to keep being a cheerleader and I'm going to keep saying things are good with SAFE right now.
Well, I clearly remember you trained me for 2 years of lobby days, which was the most well-organized, wonderful couple of insightful efforts by NCIA. And I learned from you 2 things that really have helped me to understand and deal with those. Well, first of all, senators and congressional House members, they don't really understand the issues. Maybe certainly many do, but so many do not understand. They don't even know what THC or CBD or 280E is. And second of all, and this was really important for me to hear, a reminder that right now in Washington, they have many other priorities. And cannabis is way down on the list. We don't want to hear that. We don't want to believe that, but that helped me understand it and deal with it. So are you really saying that you do hear whispers? I look back at a recent talk that you gave for Orca, and it does look like now tell me really, there are some whispers, right? It still could happen yet this year, even this summer?
Yeah, so one, you mentioned lobby days. We just concluded our recent lobby days 2 or 3 weeks ago, had about 150 of our members on the Hill. We did a couple hundred meetings on the Hill. We were pushing SAFE. I did a briefing on the Senate side around SAFE because I wanted to bring in small businesses. So we brought in small businesses, and I did my own little hearing where I asked questions to these small businesses, because the Senate hearing wasn't as focused on small businesses as I had hoped. And the whole point of SAFE is helping small businesses get access to financing. And so one, that was really positive. And I mentioned the 3 big players on SAFE are the Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. He's saying positive things. The Senate Banking Chair, Sherrod Brown of Ohio, he's been saying good things. And of course, from the activist wing, Cory Booker from New Jersey. Those are the real 3 people that if they're not comfortable, then SAFE is not going to be moving forward. If they're in a comfortable position that they feel like the bill addresses a lot of their concerns, then they're willing to move it forward. From what we've been hearing, they want to move the bill. They want to move the bill regular order. They held a hearing, which was great. They would like to move things hopefully by August recess, which would mean maybe a markup. But, Gene, you follow the news. There was a banking crisis going on in this country. Some of these banks were closing down, and there was an issue. And, Congress has other priorities in life, not just Senate banking, not just SAFE banking. It's banking in general and other issues. It takes time, but I know they want to do it. I know they want to get around it. And I'm going to keep staying positive and keep pushing them to hopefully get something in the next couple of weeks. And if we hear something great, it's going to be really wonderful news.
But technically, do we need 10 Republican senators? Do we need 60 votes?
So the way Senate, and I don't want to get too bogged down in Senate rules, but the way Senate rules work is to move any controversial piece of legislation, you need 60 senators to sign off on it. And so if 60 senators don't sign off on it, the bill is not going to go forward. And if the bill is not going to go forward, I mean, you're not doing anything with the bill. And the last time I checked, I think the Senate was 51 to 49 Democrats. So technically, I think they need 9 Republicans, but that is if every single Democrat is in line. So you start doing the math. It's not a simple majority. You have to get a super majority of 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65. So you have a little wiggle room. And, from our own whip count, from our own, reaching out to offices, depending on how the bill's written, there could be 65 to 70 senators supportive of this. But the devil is in the details on how the bill is written. And if you write the bill to include more social equity provisions that Democrats are comfortable with, you can lose some Republicans. If you tighten the language to get more Republicans interested, you can lose some Democrats. And there's that very fine line. There have been a lot of negotiations going on for years with lots of stakeholders. The last thing the Senate wants to do is open this bill up and amend it and then add a whole new monkey wrench into the legislation. So they're trying to move it as is, but no bill's perfect. And if they have to add amendments, they're going to add amendments. All I care about is if they get safe over the finish line. We want a floor vote. We want 60. We want to get it done. I want to move on with this bill and talk about legalization, talk about taxation, talking about scheduling. I want to talk about all these things, other issues that we need to be addressing, not just safe banking. And until safe banking passes, we're not going to be moving on to the other issues.
How about Senator Booker? Is he going to stand in the way? Because that did happen the last time, right?
So, even though I've worked for politicians for 25 years, politicians are politicians, which means they talk out of both ends. And he will say one thing to this group and another thing to another group. And he says positive things and then he says negative things. So it's very important that Senator Booker is comfortable with this bill. If not, it puts Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in a bad position. Democrats don't want to bring up a bill that Democrats don't like. And if the chairman of the banking committee doesn't like a bill, chances are it's not going to come up. These are the parts of the negotiation. And so it's making sure those 3 offices are comfortable with the bill and then adding those 9 or 10 or 11 Republicans and then getting over the finish line. Those are the provisions. And like I said, when you get Republicans more comfortable with this, you can lose some Democrats. It's frustrating to me because I just want this bill done. And let's address some of the other issues Democrats care about in the next bill, the next form of legalization. But I'm not a senator. And so we have to listen to them. We have to lobby them and respect their opinions and make sure they're more comfortable. So we need more people like you, Gene, coming to town and lobbying. We got to do another lobbying effort.
Well, who doesn't want safe banking? That's an outcry that you taught me. And
Well, there's a couple out there. It's frustrating, but there are some people out there that don't think it goes far enough.
And is it education? It's like you said, some of these issues around what they want to pack in.
Well, they don't think it goes far enough. They don't think
Yeah.
it addresses the issues. They care, and I agree with them.
Yeah.
But the whole purpose of SAFE is not addressing the issue. It's just allowing the banks to deal with the industry. So then that gives us a little more momentum, and it lowers the cost and makes it a little easier for these businesses to expand.
So let's look at some of those things because I think that's part of the confusion. What is in there or not? Now, here's one of my hot buttons. I want institutional capital to come into our market. SAFE won't give us that, right? What will? What could do that?
You mean the uplisting provision?
I want that to uplisting to the NASDAQ as an example, or even the NYSE. But I want big banks and I want family offices and other large institutional capital to come in and invest. That would open up the spigot of the needed investment. Now, SAFE, will that give some protection, do you think, or would that happen as part of SAFE? What's your view?
A couple points, and I don't claim to be a lawyer in Treasury law, but from what I've heard, as long as cannabis is a Schedule I drug, the Department of Justice always has reasons to look at enforcement. So that's always going to be out there until you reschedule or delist cannabis. But the Treasury Department, if SAFE passes, This is basically guidance for the Treasury Department to say this is not a priority. Allow this to happen. So I agree with you. I think the financial spigot will open up. I think the cost of capital will drop. I think companies will be a lot stronger. If you follow the stocks out there in cannabis, you can always tell when SAFE is getting some energy because the stocks go up because people are feeling good. And you know when it passes, these companies will be stronger, more money will come into the cannabis industry, and then more money will go to advocacy. So I support incremental reform. I think SAFE is the first step to the next step, but there are a lot of people who think SAFE doesn't go far enough. Using a sports analogy, they're waiting for the home run versus a couple singles. And guess what? If and when that day comes, and it could be years off, what is the industry going to look like? You already look at the industry now when SAFE didn't pass in December. Look at the pullback in advocacy. Look at the layoffs. Look at how struggling these businesses are. Look where their stocks are. And that's not a good sign for the industry. And even Senator Schumer said he didn't want to kill the industry, but guess what? You're indirectly killing the industry by not allowing investment in this industry.
Sure. Well, let's keep talking about some of those singles because I'm willing to take those and let's tap into some of those. The next one is around 280E relief. I mean, possibly just listening to you on today's discussion, maybe that would wake up people. So now they'll take the next single, which is relieving this terrible tax burden. It's the reason these large and small companies cannot even see a profitable bottom line. And just to give a one-liner of why 280E, just give that description. What is 280E for anyone who doesn't?
So quickly, 280E is provision in tax law that its original intent was 40 years ago. They did not want local drug dealers to be able to write off business expenses. And so they said if you're trafficking in a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 drug, cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug, you can't write off legitimate business expenses. Now, like I said, that was done 40 years ago. No one had envisioned at the time a thriving state legal cannabis industry with tens of thousands of small businesses. And so you're going to have to change tax laws, or these businesses cannot write off standard business deductions. So their tax rates are enormous. It's not even a tax rate. It's almost a penalty where the government is just stealing that money versus paying a legitimate tax. And so this is really hurting their bottom line, their ability to grow, their ability to hire, their ability to invest back in their companies. And when I talk to businesses for 10 years, everyone loves SAFE and they want it over the finish line, but their bottom line is directly tied to 280E. That is the most important thing for their financial health. 280E is more nuanced than safe banking. It is a provision in the tax code. And if you know anything about Congress, they don't change the tax code unless it's a really big tax reform, which happens every 5 or 10 years. And so it's really hard to work on a tax issue without doing tax reform. And then there needs to be, I hate to say it, the cannabis industry needs to invest more in advocacy. People expect Congress to move mountains, and for people like me to move mountains when I don't have the resources to be able to do what other industries are doing in this country. And you mentioned lobby days. You're not only you're competing against other industries, getting their attention, getting congressional attention. If you're not investing in 280E, members of Congress are going, what? I don't understand that provision. Why is it important? And they don't understand how many more jobs would be created in this industry if they had 280E relief. And that's something I care about. It's something I've been pushing, but I am realistic to know that SAFE is close. 280E would be the next one, next to legalization and delisting and regulation. But it's something that really hits the bottom line, and I would love to do more on that in my next adventure.
Like I said at the top of this conversation today, people are down and out. They're in a bad mood over this. The stock price of the public companies has no relationship to what's actually going on, although 280E has kept back, strong profits, strong bottom line. So that's what's so disappointing, that by Congress acting, that could change everything. So the next single using baseball terms, I'd like to see is interstate commerce. Now, I know it's controversial, but what's your view of how close or not could that happen in the near term? What's your view there?
I know there are groups out there. I think they call themselves the Craft Cannabis Alliance. They're out in Oregon. And what you're seeing is states that have an abundance of cannabis products where the prices are really going down and they're good at producing, wanting to be able to sell to other legal states that maybe aren't as efficient in growing. And they're pushing like interstate compacts to where someone in Oregon could sell to another state that's legal. We all know that, the reason why we get orange juice from Florida is because they're good at growing oranges and the prices are down. And we know that if you were to leave the free market up to this, cannabis would go to where it's grown the best and grown the cheapest. And, that may not be in a warehouse in Minnesota. And that may not be on Long Island. And so there are ways, if we had interstate commerce, where things would get into an equilibrium. But I don't think we can do that now. I don't think states are going to be able to sell until Congress acts and basically delist this plant. And once they do and you have legalization, I think the day after you'll have interstate commerce, which is a big issue because you have businesses investing millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in a state-based model, and they can't, the day after legalization, lose that investment. And so I'm cognizant of the fact that if you want investment in the cannabis industry, you need to be able to allow investors to get a return on that investment. And Congress needs to be thinking about that when they do legalization, when they do deschedule, when they allow interstate commerce. It's something to think about.
So what you've taught me on this conversation is, if we were lucky enough, if the magic would happen and the enlightenment would happen, and we got safe pass this year, this summer, that 280E and interstate, that's not going to happen as part of that. The uplift listing to other exchanges is not going to happen as all that. But then it could start a series of these opportunities to come to bear as the stigma slowly rolls off. So let's now go to the big fish, which is where I already shared. I've made a fool out of myself predicting from the stage many times over these years. I no longer do that. Even Vivian Azer, the amazing analyst from Cowen, said, she's not talking about it either. So let's talk about it. Now, I want you to explain what the Schedule 3 is, and then I read about Schedule 5 and 6. Explain that. And I hear Schedule 3 is trending, that it could be one of those great big opportunities that could happen. Is that right? Is that wrong? What's your view? Talk to us.
There's my opinion, and there's, official NCIA policy. And official NCIA policy is delist cannabis, treat it and tax it and regulate it like alcohol, and free the plant. That's our official position. Also, 280E applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. So just by that, if Congress or the president were to deschedule or reschedule cannabis to Schedule 3, there's a financial benefit to businesses. So that's always out there. But last October, surprisingly, right before the midterm elections, President Biden made an announcement around cannabis. And you have to put this into perspective. You have President Biden, who is 80 years old, 82 years old, 81, who probably wrote most of the drug laws on the books, who has a son who probably has a substance abuse problem, probably is not the biggest fan of cannabis as a family or as a person. But I think he realized as a president, this is a very important issue that energizes people. And I think it's a way to win an election and get people energized to go out to vote. And it wasn't surprising that last October, he said that the federal government, the Biden administration, should study rescheduling cannabis or delisting cannabis. And they're going to come back with their recommendations. Now, with that being said, the Food and Drug Administration, they're a bunch of bureaucrats that bring drugs to market, and they're regulators. They're not the Department of Justice. They're not arresting people. Their focus is on regulating drugs. So when they are having stakeholder meetings now, And I think when you talk to them, and like you said, people are whispering, the momentum is talking about Schedule 3, Schedule 3. Why? Because I think that's in their wheelhouse as a drug regulatory agency, bringing drugs to market. Now, if that were the recommendation and that were to come out, does it address 280E? Yes, it addresses 280E, which is going to be great for cannabis businesses. So I think you will get unanimous support from an industry-wide perspective that that's good for the industry and it's a start. The problem is that if it's a Schedule 3 drug, you're still not addressing the criminal justice aspect about the people getting arrested. And there are things that need to get addressed on that end. Why are we fighting the war on drugs? We're trying to end the war on drugs. We don't want people in jail. We don't want people keep getting arrested for this plant. There's that component that it doesn't go far enough. And then the other component is, okay, now is Schedule 3, is it now a pharma drug? And is it a pharma drug? What does that mean for the cannabis industry as a whole and retail outlets? And that is the bigger issue that is debatable. What will this mean to my small business? Will I be able to survive in the future Schedule 3 world? And so, strange things happen in presidential elections. There's a lot of momentum going in that direction. There's a new coalition of cannabis companies that are supporting and they're not pushing for Schedule 3, but they're accepting Schedule 3. They're pushing for delisting, but they're accepting. Gene, if you talk to people in the industry, there are a lot of people who would support Schedule 3. I'm still cautiously optimistic. I'm not 100% sold on it. I don't think it goes far enough. I think Congress needs to do a lot, but Congress isn't doing what they should be doing. And you see that in, and we can mention this in a minute, CBD, the Farm Bill, and other components where the administration is not regulating and they are not doing their job. And that's an important part about this, to where if it goes to a Schedule 3 drug, are they going to have the tools to be able to regulate this properly, or is Congress going to have to do something on top of it? So there are a lot of issues out there, but I want people to be positive. This is the first time in history a president has said some positive things around this issue, and they're actually looking to address the concerns. But I think everyone who cares about this plant and cares about a thriving cannabis industry needs to be thinking about this, because the last thing we all want is we have legalization, but it's not the legalization we are looking for.
Since I brought up these schedules, just now touch on Schedule 5 and 6, just to educate us. What the heck are those?
So I'm not a drug lawyer, so I would, there's a scheduling the uses of the drugs. Honestly, I don't even know what a Schedule 5 or 6, 4 or 5 drug is. In reality, cannabis, let's be honest, this is an amazing plant that can have a health benefit. It can be a medicine. It can be an intoxicant. It can be a skin cream. NCIA did a policy paper on what we thought regulations should look like. And our view was it shouldn't be a one size fits all. It should be depending on the use of the product, would determine who the regulatory agency was. So if you are using it as an intoxicant, if you are using it as a medicine, if you are using it as a skin cream or other things, they would have different regulatory bodies over it. We need to free the plant. The last thing we need to do is bottle up the plant. That's why our position is delisting. But to think that you can create this, you can have this as a commodity like tomatoes, it's not, because it's special. There needs to be rules and regulations around it, but there is a pathway forward. I recommend people go to NCIA's website and look at that policy paper from 2019. And if I can, I'll try to throw it up here in the chat.
They are so well done. So good for you for that. Really, it's very, very disappointing that we don't have this in place yet. But, you brought up the hemp bill. So let's talk about that. When might this new version, 2023 version of the hemp bill happen? And what do you think is going to happen with Delta 8 and Delta 9 or anything else related to that? Will we see changes?
So, the Farm Bill passed in 2018. So I was at 5 years ago. In that amount of time, the administration is passing the buck and looking for Congress to clarify. Farm bills are very controversial bills in DC, and they're very hard to get through, especially when you have a divided Congress, Republican House, Democratic Senate, Democratic White House. Everyone has a different perspective of what should be in a farm bill. From what we've been hearing, is that I expect delays going on, whether the delays are later this year or going into next year. It isn't going to be a slam dunk. And I think the CBD regulatory component that is needed is not going to be in the original draft when they draft a farm bill and drop it and introduce it, but it's going to be needed and will probably get addressed in some amendments later on. But you need clarifying language. We need to address these issues. I think Delta 8 is a unintended consequence. It's when the science beats the regulations. No one knew what Delta 8 was 5 years ago, and the fact that you can get intoxicants, at a gas station in Tennessee, I think that's an issue. I know the regulated market looks at this as an unfair advantage, and I think you are going to see states probably start saying, if you want to be in this space, you need to follow these you need to join the regulatory system, because we need equal taxes, we need equal testing, we need equal regulations if it is going to be an intoxicant. But one is legal, hemp, one isn't, and so they have an advantage, and it's something you need clarification. That's why we have politics, is to clarify these things. It's just that politicians aren't doing it. It's a policy issue that should get addressed sooner rather than later. Some states are doing it, but they're not addressing it in Congress. And hopefully they can get a farm bill done in the next 18 months, and it addresses these concerns, and we can get some clarity on the CBD component.
Well, that's interesting. What I'm learning from you is it's not a fait accompli that it would happen this year then.
It's there. So, on these bills, there's nothing that says it has to get done, because they can just follow the previous bill and keep going on autopilot until they get new ones. And so if Congress doesn't create new rules or new legislation, the default is the old one, and they just go with the old rules and they keep going forward. So the whole point is to update the bill and clarify something that's happened in the past couple of years. I can't remember when the last farm bill passed, unless it was 2018.
18, it was.
So
Yes,
5 years ago. So they're trying to clarify things that have happened in the last 5 years. That's why they do it.
So some of these Delta 8 and Delta 9 products are really quite interesting, but I myself have been a victim of what's called intoxicating hemp, meaning not understanding what was in that CBD bottle. So I'm not for those products going away, but like you said, being tested, the labeling was completely off on something that got a hold of me, and I'm for them. Do you predict, like I do, that they will be in legal dispensaries instead of in Buc-ee's and the gas station?
So, the longer they're in gas stations and the more money they're making and more advantages they're going to have to be able to push back and actually be a voice against that. And so my personal view is, I think middle America, soccer moms, housewives, regular people, they want to know what's in their products. You gave a perfect example. You want to know. So when you're consuming, you want to know, what effect this will have. Is there THC in there? How much is it? What effect it'll have on the body? So and you have a good experience that you want to repeat. And so when you have a product on a Friday, it's one experience. You want the same experience next Friday. And so I think the way you have that is you have testing, you have rules, you have regulations that are all uniform across, cannabis, across hemp. So yes, I think we need to go in that direction. But what I think and what Delta 8 and hemp companies are pushing in state legislatures, it depends on how much they're spending on lobbying. That's the big issue. It's not only will it be good policy, or will they be able to push back on this from a self-interest standpoint? And they're definitely making money, unlike a lot of the cannabis industry people.
Yes, but once again, and back to both SAFE as well as this issue, and you've taught me this, they don't understand. Most people in DC and in Congress have no idea what Delta 8 or Delta 9 might be and what it could do. So what can we do? There's plenty of advocates and activists right on this webinar. Is there anything we can do to help make some of these things happen, even staying with safe banking? Is it a matter of lobbying or writing to senators? What about wealthy Republican donors? What can we do, if anything, to make a difference?
So one, that's a perfect question, and I'm reading the chat, and Maria put in a question about our experience, my experience with public education campaigns, and aimed at officials and regulators. Yes, all the above. And so Gene, my job is to educate. And 10 years ago when I started, it was to raise the profile of the industry, give professional representation to the industry, have the cannabis industry treated like every other industry in DC and have representation, and to educate policymakers, because that unless you're Earl Blumenauer or you're a couple of members of Congress that are really informed on cannabis, you're not going to know much about cannabis because you are a politician. Chances are maybe you were a prosecutor at one time. Maybe you had bad views on cannabis. Maybe you're not a consumer and you don't know. And so it's being able to look behind the curtains and say, cannabis isn't what you thought it was. Here are the people who consume it. So education campaigns are very important. I've tried to, my perspective has always been, suit and tie, business perspective. I want to increase the profile of the industry. I'm not into the whole stoner culture. I don't think that's a good vibe. And even though it's the history, it's very hard for politicians to relate to something like that. And so I try to do whatever I can to have a professional face, and doing meetings versus the protest aspect. More money needs to go into advocacy. And I'm just being honest with you. There hasn't been the resources in cannabis advocacy that's needed to compete with other groups. I'm one person. So if I'm lobbying, how many members can I reach? How many offices can I reach? And for 2 years, the Capitol was closed and the only meetings you could do were on Zooms, and you couldn't really get to know people. And getting to know people is where you break through, and spending that time with people, but it's time consuming. We just did our lobby days where we had 200 meetings in 2 days. You know how long it would take me to do 200 meetings? It would take me 6 months to do that. And so just to constantly be out there talking to members takes time and takes money. And I would love 10 of me out here in DC doing it, representing the industry. It would be a lot better. And then educating the public so people know about Delta 8, and people are calling their members of Congress to say, do this, we support you. You're seeing this in New York. You're seeing what's happening in New York. Things I'm doing in DC just take longer, but what you're doing in New York is playing out in New York for good or bad, but at least stuff is happening.
To key off of what you just said, we recently met with Congressman Dean Phillips, and he said the industry, our cannabis industry, needs a loud one voice saying we must do these things. So I'm very hopeful that we can put that together, and this new group of MSOs may help, right?
So I'm gonna toot my own horn for a second. So in 2020 and 21, because the Capitol was closed and everyone was at home, there wasn't the interaction. In 2019 and before, I would hold regular happy hours at our office. I'd have congressional staff. I'd have cannabis advocates, cannabis lobbyists. We would all get together and we would talk and we would brainstorm, and it was really great. Well, with COVID, everyone was on their own. So you started having siloed conversations. And in December, when I started talking to Capitol Hill offices, a repeating theme I heard was, Mike, we don't know what the cannabis industry wants. One group wants one thing, another group wants something else. This company wants something. It was very frustrating. And in January, I started reaching out to my friends in other trade groups and say, hey, let's try to get together. Let's brainstorm. And we had a strategy session at my house. All the other trades were at my house. And we talked about what we could agree on and when could we work together and what would that mean. And we all did a sign-on letter supporting SAFE. We did a briefing all together on the House side, educating members. And we did a reception on the House side. That made me so happy because the industry was working together. And that's what we need more of. We need a unified voice versus scattered voices, especially for the industry. So then the Hill can say, this is what the industry wants. This is what advocates want, and this is what proponents are pushing back on. And I don't want to mix message. So maybe in my new position, that's something I can help facilitate, is to make sure
Yes.
the industry is unified, because it's needed. And every other industry unifies to fight existential threats, and cannabis is so new. We're still fighting ourselves right now before we've ever got to legalization. Our enemy is prohibitionists. We need to get together, and we need to work together in the short term so we can get legalization, and that's important.
Yes, so important. Yes, I see you as a real catalyst for that one voice. Start getting people together again. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So just to look at the landscape in general and to say this, now 24 states plus DC have adult use legislation, and 40 states have plus DC have some form of medical or adult use. So the states have taken action into their own hands, but of course that hasn't solved any of the problems that we talked about today from
I joke around, Gene, and I'll say 50 states will legalize cannabis before Congress legalizes cannabis.
There we go.
I hope not, but we're going in that direction.
You think even the 2 holdout states will come around finally?
Yeah, exactly. Even in 2018, I felt like we were at a tipping point. Like, you just saw so many states legalizing, and there was so much positive momentum. Things would have been different in cannabis reform if COVID didn't happen. I think that messed us up by a year or two. I'm hopeful long term. I'm very hopeful long term. In the short term, I know people out there, it's very frustrating. In DC, things are going on that 10-year plan. SAFE is up to that 10-year plan. I know it's very frustrating for people on the outside. It's frustrating for me when people get frustrated and they don't invest in advocacy, and then I don't have the resources to keep my job and do my job. And we need more of that now. But I know something like SAFE getting done would just bring so much energy and resources into this movement. I think that would be the spark that we need.
Boy, I'm with you. Mike, thank you so much for being here, and I'm counting on you to help create that one voice so we can get some of this done. It really would just change the game for so many. I also want to thank our alliance partners, Green Tech Technology, Hoodie Analytics, and Green Check Verified for any of your treasury needs. Now, this replay will be posted in our library of programs, so take a look at that. Join us for the next one, and we'll be announcing that shortly. Thank you all for engaging and being with us today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Gene.